Thank you, Moderator. We are gathered at a crucial moment in the life of the Church of Scotland. Across our congregations, we feel the weight of change. Recent General Assemblies have introduced necessary reforms, but the urgency of the current financial situation demands even more difficult decisions. In December 2023, free reserves covered less than 5 months of operating costs, and we have worked to stabilise this. This doesn't mean funds will run out in 5 months' time. Reserves are a safety net that can only be used once and must be protected. In 2024, the Assembly instructed us to achieve a balanced budget by 2027. Not a suggestion, but a necessity for our future. Since then, income has continued to fall in real terms as cost pressures rise. In response, we have implemented measures we had hoped to avoid: a voluntary exit scheme, proposals for compulsory redundancies, modification of the Seeds for Growth budget, and changes to the vacancy allowance. We also present amendments to the Presbytery Mission Plan Act, sharpening the focus on financial sustainability. These include mandatory adjustments where congregations cannot meet their debts. We recognise the deep grief these steps bring. They affect people and their livelihoods, ministries, and every part of the Church's life. We acknowledge that pain, and we hold in prayer all who are affected. Yet, even as we name these challenging areas, we affirm a deeper reality. The mission of the Church is not suspended. From evangelism and social action to worship and ministry, our resources empower the Church to live out its missional calling. We are stewards of what has been entrusted to us, gifts given by past generations and by the faithfulness of many in the present. Budgets matter, reserves matter, sustainability matters, but these are not the final word on our future. While finance may be a key, the door it opens is not financial alone. It is missional. Ultimately, our choices are not just about money, they are about people, about calling, about what we believe God is doing among us, what we prioritise, how we spend our time, and the focus of our energy. These are the real measures of our commitment. Financial stewardship cannot be separated from our identity as a church, called to proclaim Christ's reign, to serve in love, and to nurture discipleship across generations. The Articles Declaratory remind us, mission is not a programme to preserve the church. It is the church's very identity, grounded in the risen Christ whose Spirit empowers us. And that mission, faithfully resourced, is what we as trustees are committed to enabling. We are not called to mere survival. We are called to mission. Growth through mission is not a luxury. It is the essential pathway to the deep adaptive change that our church now requires. Authority in the church is not an excuse for control, but a vocation to be continually reformed by the word in worship, in witness, and in service. We hold together inherited structures and prophetic imagination to lead not with fear, but with conviction shaped by grace. The vision for mission is not technical, but theological. We are sent, not to restore old forms, but to become a new people. Not to control outcomes, but to faithfully plant and water. Not to serve the institution, but to serve Christ. This mission requires courageous leadership, not just those who grasp its certainty, but also those who can name pain, hold ambiguity, and still lead with hope. It is not a vision of managerial survival, but of spiritual vocation. That is why we are committed to supporting mission-driven local initiatives with spiritual and numerical growth at their heart. Already 16 projects have been approved through Seeds for Growth, targeting over 650 people, young people, with 8 more recently receiving Level 3 funding. These projects focus on intergenerational worship, church planting, and discipling of those under 40. They are a response to a question posed by a former moderator 17 years ago. Where are the children? We are beginning to answer, not with lament, but with a plan. These initiatives are incubators of faith, places where the church is not just remembered, but reborn. But we must go further with the intent of growth. That is why we are exploring with Fappelt what it might mean to develop resourcing churches, new worshipping communities, planted where young adults live and study and work. We do not imagine this will be easy. We believe it is faithful. The trustees are working to enable a church that is outward focused and better equipped for tomorrow. To that end, we are developing new financial ministry model to be brought to next year's assembly. This model will give congregations and presbyteries greater control, link giving directly to ministry support, and ensure provision for the poorest and the most vulnerable. In parallel, reviewable charges are being introduced for future vacancies, ensuring flexibility and sustainability while honouring the call to ministry. We know this raises deep questions of tradition and trust, but we are called to steward the church's future with integrity, and these proposals reflect that responsibility. Stewardship is not about survival. It is about aligning our resources with our calling. And as we look ahead, we do so as a church committed to welcome and inclusion. The new theological statement on disability and inclusion reminds us that the body of Christ must value the gifts of all. Mission that excludes is not mission at all. As trustees, we are clear. Every decision about money, property, or staffing must be measured by this single question: does this serve the mission of Christ? If the answer is no, we must have the courage to let go with grace, not fear. We cannot simply hope that one more initiative, one more policy change, or one more cut will bring the renewal we all long for. The church must reckon honestly with its grief, because unspoken grief becomes stagnation. But grief acknowledged can prepare us for transformation. The early church faced such a moment when persecution forced it beyond Jerusalem. It didn't collapse, it adapted. It trusted not in its structures, but in its risen Lord. We must do the same. We need leaders, elders, ministers, and members who can say boldly, we trust the promises of God more than the patterns of the past. We must stop managing decline and start reimagining our witness, trusting that in losing what we cannot keep, we will find again the life we are called to share. This task does not sit with the Assembly trustees alone. It belongs to every kirk session, every presbytery, every member. It requires courage to let go of old ways that no longer serve us and to embrace new ways of being the church in a shifting world. It is my prayer that we will be bold in our decisions, faithful in our commitments, and open to the adaptive change that lies before us. And so, Moderator, we lay before the Assembly not our accounts and financial strategies, but a vision that our stewardship of people, places, and resources be governed not by fear, but by faith in the one who calls us all. I lay the annual report and accounts on the table and present the report of the Assembly Trustees and move the deliverance.
Indeed. Yep. That would have shortened today's debate considerably, I think. Before we move to formally receiving the report, I'm going to take questions. And just a little word of warning, because this year I don't need to be as nice as I was last year in the chair. We have a large number of issues to deal with today, and each one is as important as the next one. So please keep our questions, and later we move to comments concise as possible, because we want to ensure that everyone has the opportunity to make points, to have issues answered, and so on. So in terms of the questions that I see on the screen in front of me, I'm going to call for Stuart Meikle, then Stella Campbell, and then Madeline Sailors. Stuart, first of all. And if you can start to move towards the microphones, that would be handy. Stuart's over here.
Good morning, Stuart Meikle, Commissioner number 76. I'm an elder and first-time commissioner from St Mary's in Haddington. I've got a deep concern about one element of the report. In Appendix 3, it talks about insolvent charges and how the church deals with that. Obviously, a bad state of affairs. But Section 10.6.1, I have deep concerns about. It basically states that in the event of an insolvent charge, the tenure of the minister will be terminated as if they had deemed to have demitted their charge, which I thought was extreme, very extreme and a drastic measure. I've worked in business for 35 years, and in the private sector, you simply would not be allowed to do this, which, is, as I read it, is effectively make the minister redundant, not even paying them a redundancy payment. So I guess my question is, I couldn't find an analogy in business, and I guess the question is this the way we want to be treating our ministers? Is this the way we want to be attracting new ministers into ministry? And is this the way we want to attract ministers to take on the less attractive financial charges? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Convener.
Thank you, Moderator. These amendments to the Presbyterian Plan Act are brought in with a heavy heart. It's heartbreaking. It is heartbreaking. There is such emotional attachment to all of this. The emotional attachment doesn't make for good policy. We have to deal with the facts. And we're dealing with the facts of congregations that are unable to pay their debts. We're not making ministers redundant in this process at all. There is a process within the Act to allow the release of that minister in terms of the amendment that we're trying to make. This is serious. I can't emphasise enough that we can't continue to pay the way we are paying for congregations that are not able to meet their debts. It's very, very important. I can guarantee the Assembly we're not making ministers redundant at all. Through the Act, there's a process for the presbyteries to look at the situation in conjunction with our finance department. Thank you.
Thank you. We have Stella Campbell next.
Moderator, Stella Campbell, Commissioner number 331, Presbytery Clark, North East and Northern Isles. I have two questions for the convener. First of all, both relate to section 9.14 of the report. Firstly, in relation to every new vacant charge after the 1st of June 2025 becoming reviewable, is the intention to have a standardised basis of reviewable charge for that. Presbytery undergoes considerable conversations with congregations in terms of doing basis of adjustment. So is the intention to move towards having a standard set of questions or terms within a basis of reviewable charge? The second question, a number of congregations are currently midway through adjustment. Congregations are voting on basis of adjustments that have already been agreed by the relevant bodies within the Church of Scotland, but their unions will take place after the 1st of June. What will happen with those congregations?
Thank you for the question, and thank you for giving me notice of the question. Reasonably late in the evening, unfortunately, but I appreciate giving notice nonetheless. In terms of section 10.2 of the Presbytery Mission Plan Act, a basis of reviewable charge must be negotiated with the office bearers involved. Its text must be submitted to FAPLT to ensure it's consistent with the mission plan, and it must be submitted to the principal clerk and the law department to ensure that its provisions are in conformity with the church and civil law. A template basis of reviewable tenure is provided by the Principal Clerk's Office and is available on the website and should be used. If a vote on a basis of adjustment has happened before the 1st of June 2025, then nothing will be undone after the 1st of June 2025. So a charge given permission to call on an unrestricted basis can still do so. A confirmation to that effect will be issued by the Principal Clerk to the Presbytery Clerks after the Assembly. If the Minister of an insolvent charge is given notice under the new 10.6.1, then their tenure of that charge is ended at the end of the 6-month period. If adjustment takes place in the meantime, the Minister could be introduced to the new adjusted charge under Section 842, and their existing unrestricted tenure is not affected. When the 6-month period ends, they are deemed to have demitted from their former unadjusted charge. That is superseded by now having ongoing unrestricted tenure in the new charge. So basically, they are in the same position they would have had had the adjustment taken place without the need for the insolvent charge process. I hope that answers fully what you've asked.
Thank you, Convener. We have Madeleine Sailors, and just to give notice that John Ferguson and Scott Burton will be the next questioners.
Oh, perfect. Thank you. Madeleine Sailors, 537. I want to introduce myself as a young adult volunteer from the Presbyterian Church, USA. And having had this experience in Scotland for the last 8 months, I can't help but notice that there are certain privileges I've been afforded as a volunteer being funded by a specific program to engage in young adult support programs. And I wanted to, something struck me in your speech when you talked about young adults and placing churches and programs in areas that are going to benefit young adults. And so I wanted to ask about specific measures that would do that for the young adults currently in the church.
Moderator, thank you for the question. I appreciate it. And we do appreciate the volunteering that many people do in our church. This is a question probably more related to faculty. I would ask that could be answered there. But what I would say is the Assembly Trustees are very keen to invest in new models of ministry, and particularly with young people at its heart. The Seeds for Growth budget would allow for that, and the scheme that's in place is actively encouraging new models of church with a particular focus on intergenerational and young people at its heart. As I did say in my speech, there's already 16 new projects available dealing with that at this particular time. So thank you for the question, but I think most of it could be answered by faculty. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. John Ferguson.
Thank you, Moderator. It's John Ferguson, 283. It's just a question in regard to section 4.36 in the report in relation to the Presbytery block grant. The Presbytery block grant at the moment stands at £126,000 a year, and this is in the context of the fact that we're looking at devolving more powers to Presbytery from the Central Church. It was just really to ask, how exactly is this going to happen? How exactly is this going to work? Because to take away the block grant would mean reducing our budgets by a huge amount in order to make ends meet, or increasing presbytery dues by a very large amount. And if it's the latter, my question is, how will congregations be able to afford such a huge increase in presbytery dues?
Thank you, John. I appreciate the question. We are looking at this seriously. In the coming year, we'll be looking very closely at the financing ministry model. It would be our intention to try and break that loop that you talk of money going to presbyteries without increasing dues. We don't know what that model looks like yet, and there is a meeting will be established the first week in June, I believe. The second week in June, of which many of our stakeholders within the church, including our presbyteries, will be part of that ongoing discussion as we take the year to develop that. Just to give an idea of the kind of conversations that we would have, we would like to keep, for most of the giving that's collected at a local level, to remain at the local level, and for local level to pay for the work of the presbyteries, and presbyteries to pay for the work of the centre, and the centre to resource what it can from a slimmed down central staff in support of our ministries and our presbyteries. That's the kind of conversations we're having. I can't give you specific detail, but I want to assure you, John, as a Presbytery clerk and members of the Assembly here today, that this work, and we're taking that model of financing ministry very seriously, and we'll address that when we bring it to the Assembly next year.
So Scott Burton, and then Derek Browning, and Ben Thorpe, and Richard Buckley. Scott.
Thank you, Moderator. Scott Burton, number 206. Question for the convener. I'm really grateful for all the hard work that Dave Kendall has been doing, and I'm sure we'll hear a bit more about his upcoming retirement at the end of May, before you finish for today. I just wondered, my question was, what are the current thoughts about next step, future replacements, process around that, timescale, those kind of questions? Not looking to see Dave go too quickly, but it's just that I don't think there's anything in the report about that. It's just asking those kind of questions.
Well, thank you for the question. It's a very good question. We are aware of the gaps in our establishment at a senior level at this current time. Proper and serious thought has been devoted to the best manner in which the functions of these roles are fulfilled going forward, and as an operational matter will be dealt with through the appropriate channels. At the moment, we are delighted that Jenny Simpson, Head of Finance and General Treasurer, has agreed to take on the executive responsibilities of the Chief Officer in the meanwhile. In terms of communications, the work of the departments continue, and any queries should be directed to her. It's very important to realise that the Chief Officer's function was set up by the Special Commission in 2019 to provide professional oversight of staff and internal systems, executive delivery of agreed strategies, accountability to the Assembly trustees, and organisational stability and continuity. The Chief Officer has the task of implementing General Assembly strategy with professionalism and clarity. While the strategic direction comes from the Sovereign Court, the General Assembly, and Assembly trustees in between General Assemblies in implementing the policies and direction of the General Assembly, requires expertise in project delivery, staff leadership, performance management, financial control, and communication, demanded of a charity the size of ours, a church the size of ours, because we're involved in civil and church law, delivering operational plans aligned to priorities, leading staff in the National Office in a cohesive direction, enhancing morale, efficiency and culture within the organisation. These are important, and the Assembly trustees have a responsibility to get that right, and I assure the Assembly that we will. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. Derek Browning, just to give notice, Ben Thorpe, Richard Buckley, then Sandra Black, and then we will be moving to the deliverance.
Thank you, Moderator. Derek Browning, number 4. My question's in relation to section 12 of the report to do with voluntary and involuntary redundancies. Can the convener tell the General Assembly how notification of this was transmitted to staff members? Were they made competently and consistently in person or by email? What pastoral support was offered to affected staff? And without going into the details, were there any non-disclosure agreements made with staff?
Thank you for the question, Derek. I appreciate that. It's a very sensitive issue. It's a very difficult issue within the church. We had, as I said, hoped to avoid it. But again, I can assure the Assembly that the voluntary exit scheme and the compulsory redundancy process was done in person, and where that couldn't be met in person, then it was done by a call, because that was the only way to be able to contact the person involved. I can also assure the Assembly that we have done this sensitively through the Employee Council, and all the proper protocols have been adhered to, again, in terms of our own church practices and employment law in the civil way of dealing with these. So you mentioned non-disclosure agreements. There were no non-disclosure agreements signed in terms of the process embarked for voluntary exit scheme and the compulsory redundancy process. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you. So we move to Ben Thorpe.
Moderator, hi. Ben Thorpe, 174. Thank you for the work that you've done looking at tenure and financial sustainability. I was just wondering, bearing in mind the restrictions of the information we have you considered any other measures of health of congregations in terms of moving forward, recognising that financial sustainability is not the only thing that will indicate whether or not a church is healthy?
Thank you for your question, Ben. The answer is yes. Local church review process exists in the church. We also have, through Fiona Tweedy, we do modelling, various modelling situations in looking at that process. So the answer is yes, there are. And the template within the Presbytery Mission Plan Act that I mentioned earlier on is also available. But the critical one in particular is local church review, because that is a health check on congregations and indeed your mission of strategy for your future. It helps you bring your thinking, your thoughts together, and maybe a realisation that either something is not right and you may benefit from moving on or working with other congregations and linkages or potential unions. But Presbytery has a part to play in this as well, in encouraging congregations and working with congregations, because it's not just merely about finance, as I said in my speech. We have to be looking at where there is flourishing congregations and support them, but also recognising the difficulty of sustaining financially congregations that would become insolvent. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you. Richard Buckley.
Buckley 155. Moderator, I wonder if the convener knows how many ministers are facing the possibility of their pastoral ties being severed. And if they're not being made redundant, what's the interim status of these ministers with respect to their stipend?
Being made redundant is not a word that we like to use in terms of ministry. Ministry is an office, it's a vocation, it's a calling. No minister, even under the circumstances, difficult circumstances that we face, should be considered as redundant in their vocation. Other opportunities in ministry will be and are and could and should be available. There is no effect on stipend at that time unless the minister demits from the charge. So it's not impacted negatively until the point of dissolution. Thank you.
And Sandra Black. I think you can speak. Yep.
Moderator Sandra Black, 124, Interim Minister in Paisley West. Can I ask about the process for ministers who find that they're losing their job through their church being insolvent? I have absolutely no problem with the idea that the church needs to cut its cloth to the money that we have. But I'd like to be reassured about the process for ministers who find themselves in this situation. In other walks of life, people have supports in their employment through unions and through processes. I, at the moment, would be very unclear about what the process for a parish minister in that situation would be. And one of the differences that ministers have compared to other people in employment is that ministers, they have their house attached to their employment, their entire accommodation. And so I'd like to be reassured that ministers won't be out of home as well as having to move on from their job. Thank you.
These processes already exist within the church. We do have the Housing and Loan Fund, which is an assistance for ministers in financial difficulty. We have ministry support available through FAPLT to talk with ministers, talk them through difficult situations. And also presbyteries have a responsibility to ensure that the right support and mechanisms are in place to look after those that find themselves in this very unfortunate situation. So I want to assure the Commissioner and the General Assembly that that is all taken seriously and these support mechanisms are in place in the church. Thank you.
Thank you, Convener. We move to the deliverance. Section 1, receive the report. After Section 1, I have notice of 4 comments. So,
thank you, Fiona. Comments come once the report is received. It's questions before, about general questions, anything to do for the remit of the Assembly Trustees or any of the reporting bodies. We have taken those questions. We are now moving to receive the report, and we will then call for comments.
So I have notice of 4 comments, and again, just to give notice, the first is James Patron Bell, will then move to Scott McCarthy, Lindsay Sanderson, Fiona Crawford. Thank you. So, James.
Moderator James Patron Bell.
Sorry. Do we receive the report and the supplementary report? Thank you. And online? Yes? Excellent. James.
Moderator James Patron Bell 438. Friends, I'd like to take you to the back page of the report. I think somebody said that the last shall be first, and the preliminary result of the ecumenical audit there. And can I encourage parishes who've yet to respond, if they get the chance to do so? I'm sure the church statisticians will be overjoyed to have further data to work with, and I see them nodding. Can I commend this to parishes as part of your mission planning? To know what is being done in the location, not just by the Kirk, but by other brothers and sisters in Christ. To work out how we can best together use our finite earthly resources in the service of our communities and in the sharing of the extravagant love of God and the good news of the gospel.
Thank you. Scott McCarthy.
Scott McCarthy, 414. Moderator, I very rarely speak at General Assemblies, but I had a wee drink earlier this morning and I feel encouraged to do so now.
I don't know that wee drink would do you much good.
I think the Church of Scotland can consider itself greatly blessed by the quality and commitment of David and the Assembly Trustees, particularly at this financially challenging time. However, I think I'm right in saying that the retirement of Barry Hughes from the Assembly Trustees means that there will be no one amongst their number who lives and works in a priority area. For decades, the General Assembly has reiterated the gospel message of priority to the poor, and yet it seems there will be no Assembly trustee who will be living amongst them and experiencing what they experience. No one can speak with authority and credibility about their plight. This despite the fact the Scottish Government recently reported that over 1 million people in Scotland, some 20% of the population, currently live in poverty. It would, I think, be a mistake if we were to ignore what the Poverty Truth Commissions have learned, that nothing about us, without us, is for us. May I suggest that urgent attention is given to adding 1 or more Assembly trustees who live and work in a priority area, perhaps by identifying suitable candidates and approaching them with a view to co-option, so that the authentic voice of the deprived can be heard and we as a church can respond appropriately and effectively. Thank you.
Thank you. So we move to Lindsay Sanderson.
Lindsay Sanderson, 439. Paragraph 13.12 speaks of the leading your church into growth process. For a number of years, synods across the United Reformed Church, especially in the northern part of Britain, and including Scotland, have been using LISIG as a tool to encourage growth in our congregations. Growth in worship, community engagement, and in number. People have participated in conferences led by the LISIG team or bespoke URC events led by URC facilitators, and in LISIG Local, which, as it suggests, is delivered locally. It has been well received, and informal feedback suggests the programme has been found to be helpful to people from across the theological spectrum. It's helpful as a resource for ministers and elders and other local leaders. And it's helpful when 2 or more people from a congregation do the course together. Sometimes being part of a church in 3 nations means it can be helpful to do things within the URC family. At other times, it makes more sense to work with our Scottish partners. I do wonder about a LISIG tartan, as each of our denominations look to foster growth in our particular Scottish church and societal context. Moderator, yesterday you encouraged us not just to know God's extravagant love, but also to show it. LISIG is a resource which has enabled and is enabling many URC congregations to do just that, and I trust it may be of similar value to the Church of Scotland.
Thank you, Lindsay. Fiona Crawford, and then Andrew Morrison.
Moderator, thank you. Fiona Crawford, 207. I welcome the convener's comments this morning, but the written report, troubles me. And there are 3 key points that I would like to outline briefly to summarise that. The first is the sheer magnitude of the implications of these deliverances versus the relative time we've had to get to grips with what they will mean for us, which has left many of us wondering where to place our focus with the time available to us. I welcome the trustees' commitment to wider engagement, but hope they will engage at a granular level that deals with how we pragmatically and practically make the rubber hit the road with what they propose at the next General Assembly. Secondly, I understand the logic of the rigour they propose applying to congregations whose finances are cause for concern, although the logistics of that also trouble me. However, bearing in mind it's the congregations who most closely fulfil our charity aim of the advancement of religion, I wonder if it's time to look closely at all our operations and whether we need to make further difficult decisions to be consistent in our rigour without underestimating the sensitivities of doing so. It also troubles me how we can still reconcile a hotel as fulfilling our charitable aim. Lastly, and I say this recognising the enormous weight of pressure on our trustees and pressure that we have put on them by asking them to take up this role. And I welcome their commitment to mission and a resourced and sustainable future. But I am really concerned that we risk crushing our congregations, our key means to fulfilling our charitable aim under a weight of bureaucracy, that in our zeal to fulfil charity law, which I know we must do, we somehow miss sight of or cannot find the capacity to fulfill our core aim of the advancement of religion, in other words, mission, and our higher calling to discern where God is at work and to join in. I ask as this work continues into this coming year that we find ourselves all on the same side, with trustees developing policy alongside those who need to make it work in congregations and in presbyteries to deliver strong, workable solutions that do not crush those we most need to free up to fulfil our core aim. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you, Fiona. Andrew Morrison. Over here.
Andrew Morrison, number 342. I'm speaking about section 13, about the Seeds for Growth, particularly about the cut, the sort of substantial cut in the funding for Seeds for Growth. As one of the youngest ministers in the Church of Scotland, I've still got 35 years until I retire. I perhaps have a more vested interest than perhaps others in making sure the church is still around, and when I retire, and my wife and my boys can worship Jesus alongside me in the Church of Scotland. And so it's a kind of concern for me that we've cut such a substantial amount from the fund that's dedicated to growing the church. And I want to encourage the committee to maybe rethink that, but also to ask, how does that fit in with your words that you said at the beginning about your desire for mission, desire for the church to grow, if we're cutting so much from the Seeds for Growth fund?
That was a comment which I think has turned into a question. Convener, do you want to just give a quick response?
Questions are always in order, moderator.
They are always in order, yes.
Thank you for the question. It's an important question. Please don't see the Seeds for Growth budget as a cut. We have given out £1.9 million to date on funding projects to bring growth that we're looking for. It's an adjustment on the way we're applying for funding. I've said already, I'm very keen that we invest in future ministries, new forms of ministry, resourcing churches. It's really important to do something new alongside the old and regenerating the church that we all want to see. The Seeds for Growth group will apply to the Assembly Trustees for continuing budget now on an annual basis. It was £25 million that we released. That money could only come from our reserves. And over the period to 2030, it works out as 60% of our reserves. We couldn't continue to do that, with all honesty. Meanwhile, saving the integrity of the intention of the Seeds for Growth initiative. And I think we've done that. And we've worked very closely with the Seeds for Growth team. The convener and I have worked very closely in working out how this was to be delivered for this Assembly. So I assure the Commissioner and the Assembly, we're still investing, we're still encouraging, and hopefully you are alongside us in this process. Thank you.
Thank you.
I beg your pardon, moderator. Correction there. 60% of our annual deficit, I should say. Thank you.
Right. Thanks for the correction. So we return back to the deliverance, section 2. So approved in the hall. Okay, so turning to section 3, we have an amendment in the name of Robert Allen. The clerk will read it out.
Thank you, moderator. At the end of section 3, to add the words, and instruct the Assembly Trustees to bring forward a fundamentally different and simplified Giving to Grow scheme in 2026, along the following suggested guidelines. All congregations should pay the amount to cover a minister, then pay 10% of the first 150,000, after that 15% of the next 100,000. Of course, it's a rich congregation. Then 20% thereafter.
Is the convener prepared to accept this? No. Is it? Oh, sorry. Is it seconded? Robert, if you would like to speak to it.
Thank you, moderator. Robert Allen, 204. So disappointing to hear you weren't accepting that, David. Moderator, I welcome much of what's in the Assembly Trustees report. In many instances, it's bringing in a real sense of realism, but I would invite them to be even more radical than they may be thinking. 435 says the fundamental principle of the new model would be that a charge that was able to meet the full cost of a full-time minister or word and sacrament would be able to call a minister with the permission of presbytery. This puts the control firmly back at the local level. Yes, indeed, that must happen. With a commitment to priority to the poor, provision must also be made for those not able to meet the full cost of ministry. Yes, indeed, that too. But we can't do all that we'd like to do. We need our congregations who can afford to give to do so. We need them kept open with the ability to call a full-time minister. Yes, we need a church presence in areas where costs cannot be met, but without our self-supporting congregations giving, we will simply not be able to do that. It's a privilege for wealthy congregations to give into this system, but these congregations are now feeling the pinch and are struggling at times to meet the very high giving to go contributions, whilst at the same time trying to grow the life and witness of their own church. We need to be realistic. If that means a decrease in income, so be it. We have to cut our cloth even more. And that may mean not having charges in areas where we would want to have a presence. Hence my amendment. For years, it's been difficult for folk to understand how congregational contributions are calculated using some bizarre formula. We need to make it simple. Let's make it simple. My suggested way of percentages in the amendment are not meant to be binding in any way, only a guide as to what I would be looking for in such a system. It will hopefully mean that many self-supporting congregations may pay less to giving to grow, but that's a road we need to take if we want these congregations to have the resources to continue and grow. This could be paid as the actual year progresses, with adjustment made at year end if required. It's akin to an income tax system, I know, though we don't like to call it a tax. And we need to encourage informal partnerships between congregations that are self-supporting and not, so that we may all benefit from increased understanding of our situations. I realise, Assembly, this is a big ask, but I believe we need to be radical in our approach, lest in the not too distant future, all we're going to have is the survival of the fittest.
Thank you, Robert. I have notice of a comment from Michael Goss.
Thank you, Moderator. Michael Goss, 285. I have some sympathy with Mr. Allen, as I often do, but not on this occasion for the particular detail of his simplicity. I'm part of a new union in the east coast of the new Perth Presbytery. My charge has 2 ministers. Next door, the new charge of our Arboretum district, a new union, has 3 ministers and an MDS. A little bit further north, Montrose, Trinity, a new charge, has 2 ministers and an MDS. Those are not going to be funded by simply saying you can pay for 1 minister. Making things too simple means we're not going to be able to properly manage how we fund ministry across the country. And I think the simplicity is going to lose that in this proposal. Thank you, Moderator.
There are no other notices. Robert, if there's anything else you'd like to add at this point, no one else has spoken, so...
No, I hear what Mike's saying, but I do believe we need to make the process simple. We need to make it realistic, and we need to allow our 1/3 of self-supporting charges more to invest and to grow in order that we may still support ministry in those much needed places. Thank you, Moderator. Thank you for Assembly for listening.
Okay, thank you, Robert. I'll get the convener to reply.
Robert, I liked it better when you were quiet for a year. Thank you for your question. It's important, and it shows us that we're thinking about it. To quote Marjorie McLean from Saturday, it's inappropriate to agree detailed proposals on the hoof from the floor of the General Assembly. As noted within the report, significant work is ongoing in terms of our financial modelling. We are foreseeing significant changes being brought to the General Assembly next year. At this stage, we cannot be tied to specific proposals, but we would welcome the input of Robert as we develop the model. Any changes to our financial systems need significant modelling in order to understand the consequences and to ensure it meets the requirements of the Church and congregations. We therefore resist this motion.
So we come to vote for this amendment, an electronic vote. I will get Sheila to talk us through the process.
Thank you, Moderator. We are voting for or against the the amendment proposed by Mr. Allen. If you are voting on the hub, the for and against buttons will appear on the current live debate page. If you are voting in the hall on the handsets, if you want to vote for, it's button number 1. If you want to vote against, it's button number 2. The vote is open. Five seconds. The vote is closed.
So they voted for the amendment, 59, against the amendment, 258. So the amendment falls. We turn to section 3 as in the print. Do we approve? No. Oh. I'm right, the clerk's wrong. Yes! Oh, now we've now got questions on the They've just appeared. Right, we have 2 questions now on section 3. David Ingalls, first of all, and Peter Davidge thereafter.
Thank you, Moderator. My question is related to, sorry, my number is 314. My question is related to the hidden costs that are additional to Giving to Grow. Our church has just recently gone through a union, and part of the union was the disposal of buildings, of which we were instructed to store quite a large number of items at our cost. Now, this is not going to be unique. There will be lots of charges where we've gone into union, and whether it's communion tables or chairs or, in our case, a bell, various other things, they have to be stored at a cost and paid for. Now, this is a penalty for union. Surely we need to consider the overall cost of everything we do. And this goes back to, does this serve the mission of Christ? We are paying, as congregations, for all sorts of oddball things that were instructed by national committees that we should do. Can we please consider the effect of these things, and also, please, just consider, when you're planning Giving to Grow, keep it level, keep it fair. If somebody has a historic charge, why do they pay more to store and insure stuff that they don't need, they don't use, against someone who maybe is in a condition where they were lucky and didn't have to store anything? I think we just need a fairness in this. I'm not looking for anything particular, but I think it's just a comment. Please consider all committees. When you're asking us to do things, somebody has to pay. And it's just, let's not find that somebody is being penalised. In some cases where it could be to the point where it affects their financial viability because of all their outgoings against what we're here for, which is mission. Thank you.
Okay, so that was a question that turned into a comment, but I think the convener notes that, yeah? We have a question from Peter Davidge.
Peter Davidge, Calton Old linked with Gorbals, Glasgow Presbytery, 157. Moderator, my apologies. I have got a question because I was unsure of the technology and I was trying it out last night and accidentally put in for a question. But since I have, and I'm on my feet, I thought I would ask a question, which was merely a concern from what was being said for those like myself who were called into places of natural insolvency, i.e. priority areas and those charges just above priority area where insolvency is not an easy target to reach because the nature of the parish or the community, insolvency is the more likely outcome, but ministry is still needed and a minister can still be called to the poorest places and the least solvent places in Scotland.
Okay, thank you. Convener, do you want to respond? Or are you happy just to take that as more a comment? Leave it as a comment. Okay, so we're back then again at section 3 as in the print. Do we approve? So that's a yes in the hall and a yes online. We have a new section 4 in the name of the convener. The clerk will read it out.
Oh, good Lord. Can I... Please may I sit down to read it, then it's on a bigger screen.
Carry on.
Thank you. Welcome the ongoing work by the Assembly Trustees in relation to a new model for funding national office functions, particularly the commitment to afford increased transparency to congregations regarding use of their contributions and the likelihood that the Assembly shall determine those activities which are to be funded. Note that this work shall include consideration of the percentage, currently 10%, that forms the shared activities component of the contributions for each charge presently gathered by the congregational contributions, open brackets, giving to grow, close brackets, regulations, Regs 1, 2022, and for those congregations in the Presbytery of International Charges, the regulations for contributions from contributions from congregations, guess where, in the Presbytery of the International Charges, Regs 5, 2016, and anticipate proposals being brought to the General Assembly of 2026 to revise and amend the regulations for the benefit of congregations. Thank you, Moderator.
Convener?
Thank you, Moderator. As highlighted in our report, the Assembly Trustees recognise that an essential work stream for the coming year is to develop a new, more sustainable model of financing ministry, which would include not just how we pay for ministry, but also how we fund presbyteries and national office activities. Prior to the publication of our report, Glasgow Presbytery submitted an overture to the Assembly seeking a review of the element of giving to grow, which pays for shared services. Last week, we were able to have a very constructive meeting with representatives from Glasgow and thank them for that. As we noted in our report, we are seeking to address a number of the known shortcomings of the current system and to give a great deal of control back to individual congregations. Further, we would wish the General Assembly to play an increased role in the decision-making process of resourcing the Church. As a result of our discussions, we agreed the wording of a new deliverance, which is this one, which we're introducing today, affirming the Assembly Trustees' intention to develop our work on a new financial model and bring proposals in respect of this to the Assembly next year. During the year, we will be working, as I've said earlier, with key stakeholders as we develop the model and ensure that it is in the best interests of our congregations.
Thank you, Convener. I have notice of one comment. Stuart Love.
Thank you, Moderator. Stuart Love, 164. I'm one of the commissioners originally designated to move the now withdrawn overture from Glasgow Presbytery. I'm grateful to the Assembly Trustees for taking the content of the overture from Glasgow Presbytery so seriously to the extent that they have brought this new section of deliverance, not least as this has saved me the stress of preparing and delivering a more expansive speech to the General Assembly. This new section of deliverance not only captures the essence of the overture from Glasgow Presbytery, but also seeks to make clear how this fits into the wider work of the Assembly Trustee, the work the Assembly Trustees hope to accomplish in the coming year. I am sure the Presbytery will be interested to see the fruits of this labour at the General Assembly of 2026. I would add that to me a more collaborative approach to the Church's work, as happened in this instance, seems preferable to the more combative approach we sometimes adopt. Thank you.
Thank you. So, do we approve the new section 4 in the name of the convener? That's a yes in the hall and a yes online. We move to section 4 as in the print. Oh. Sorry, we've got a whole load of comments have just appeared. So, they're all in the name of Alex Shuttleworth. But you speak once, not the 3 times this has come up on the screen.
Thank you, Moderator. We are Alex Shuttleworth, number 261, Presbytery Clerk of Fife. It's really the first 2 words in that section 4 that I want to highlight, instruct presbyteries. And you'll note that throughout this report, again and again, instruct presbyteries. A lot of job has been given for presbyteries to do. Now, I go back to the comment which was made earlier, which is, I think 436, which is about breaking the cyclical nature of presbytery funding and expecting presbyteries and congregations to set the budget for the presbyteries for the work they want to do. The trouble is, presbyteries' workload is not determined by congregations. Presbyteries' workload is very often determined by the national church. And therefore, even to think about stopping this block funding, 126,000, we, in terms of the presbytery dues in Fife, for example, would have to increase every congregation's presbytery dues by 2.5 times in order to cover that if it was taken away. But anyway, the point I'm making is that the workload is not determined by the people who you're expecting to determine the budget to pay for it. That is the comment I wish to make. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you, Alec. There's also a notice of a comment from Nicky MacDonald, who is online.
Moderator, thanks. Nicky MacDonald, 5, speaking to this section. Order fully 43% of the Church of Scotland is based within rural areas, and typically rural parishes tend to cover larger geographical areas, some like mine with no real central hub, but rather collections of villages. And alongside this, our populations are scattered and sparse, and many in our rural congregations are generous to a fault and have worked hard over many years to explore ways in which to fundraise. However, realistically, due to our lower populations, many of us will never be able to fully cover our ministry costs. So we have an issue of logistics on this. And over a number of years, the ongoing conversations coming from the centre have unintentionally caused rural congregations to feel like no matter what we do, we're failures or a burden to the rest of the kirk, or that we're not actually trying, that we're an inconvenience. This new section further unintentionally reinforces these feelings within our rural communities. And it also further reinforces a creeping move towards a user-pays system within the kirk that may come in. And if we go that way, then it effectively not only disenfranchises my friend from our priority areas, but it disenfranchises our rural communities, and it also undermines the third article declaratory. So members of the Assembly, I urge you to resist this. Thank you.
So we come to section 4 as in the print. Does the Assembly approve? So that's it. Yes in the room and a yes online. We have a new section 5 in the name of the Reverend Hugh Stewart. the convener, sorry, the clerk.
Just Fiona.
Just Fiona.
Just
We'll
Fiona.
read it.
Here we go. Encourage congregations to explore and implement new and innovative forms of income generation that are predicated on the 5 marks of mission contained within the Radical Action Plan of 2019 and which contribute towards congregational financial resilience in their fulfilment by God's grace of the Great Commission to their communities.
The convener has indicated he's willing to accept it. Hugh, do you just want to speak briefly to it?
Thank you very much indeed. First of all, I would just like to thank Mr. David Kendall and Mr. David Williams for all their support in the innovative exploration we have made with regard to innovation, financial resilience and mission. Just to underline that these aspects aren't mutually exclusive. They can be collaborative. And we just heard there about the periphery of the church and the centre of the church. I serve in the very periphery of the church. America is just beyond our shores. But by God's grace and by the encouragement of Mr. Kendall and also Mr. Williams, who I believe has aggregated tens, hundreds, if not millions of pounds to us in his work in the church. And that is a project that was birthed by God himself and has met absolute opposition through the structures within the church. And although the legal higher echelons come from Stornoway, they were not at liberty to enable such initiatives to take place. But God is greater than echelons, and mission was birthed, cross-pollinated mission, where we, by God's grace, hope to have a project that will help the inner cities, particularly the children with life-limiting illnesses who have never seen a deer, a sheep, fish, never fished on an estate, and parents of children who have died pre, at, and post-birth, that we will accommodate them for a week in one of the most beautiful parts of Scotland. All of that provided free to them, but also financially resilient for the ministry and mission of our charge. And that is the point I would like to make. By God's grace, these things are possible, but also please ensure that there's a reward and recognition for congregations who endeavour to attain the completion of such projects. The radical plan preceded your radical plan, because the radical plan we observed was that if we didn't do anything by God's grace, there won't be anything for the people and for the gospel and the proclamation of the gospel. So it's really just to ask, please, and I thank the convener for accepting this, that innovation and creativity and financial resilience should be continued beyond the visionary vision of Mr. Kendall. And I phoned Mr. Kendall very shortly after his appointment, and whoever the new person is going to be, expect a phone call as well. But please, please pray for the children. Where are the children? The children were yesterday at the Gaelic service where the moderator was. The Lord loves the children of Scotland, and ultimately in Christ we will all be the children of the Lord Jesus Christ. So thank you very much, Assembly, for affording me the time of speaking. Please pray for this project. Please intercede for us so that the children in the tenements and the mothers and fathers who are today's absolute, we don't talk about it, we'll talk about death, but the many, many people who are suffering and have lost little babies or little children, and we covered them without prayers, and for God's blessing to rest richly upon them.
Thank you. Thank you, Hugh. So the new section 5, which the convener is happy to accept, does the Assembly accept? So that's okay in the room and online. Section 6. Sorry, section. Because we've got a new 5, we've now got a 5. Yes, section 5, sorry. We have 2 questions, Grant Barclay and then Scott Burton.
Grant Barclay, 152, moderator. My question is simple. Will the new proposals next year be flexible? If I may, a short explanatory comment which starts with 3 thanks. 1 to David Cameron and his colleagues for their steadfast commitment in this hugely challenging time. 2nd, thanks for meeting with Glasgow Presbytery last week where I'm clerk. We found that meeting productive and supportive and hugely helpful. And on behalf of a small but important number of congregations in Glasgow, thank you for the certainty that where they are able to fund ministry, the chances are that they will have the right to call a minister of their own. However, looked at through the other end of the telescope, from Robert Allen's point, that doesn't actually enable greater local flexibility. Why not? For this reason. Glasgow has a fixed allocation of posts, and if we have to use some of these posts by right in those congregations, which then have a right to call a minister, that means that we have fewer posts to allocate across the probably 2/3 of our congregations, 1/3 of whom, as we heard from my colleague Peter Davidge, are in priority areas, and the other third are in areas of some financial challenge. This drives a coach and horses through the work which Glasgow Presbytery has undertaken over about the last 4 years to try to distribute ministry equitably and evenly across the whole of a most diverse city. And so my question to the convener is, will the new proposals next year be flexible?
Convener, could be a yes or a no answer here.
Yes, moderator.
Excellent, excellent. Scott Burton.
Scott Burton, number 206. Thank you, moderator. Question for the convener about this deliverance and about, I guess, some of the lines and comments seem to hint at things, but without necessarily giving away too much. So I guess the question that arises when I read the deliverance in the report is, are we anticipating that the numbers are going to go much lower than 600? Is that the direction of travel that you're hinting at? Because I'm not sure that's clear at first read, and so it's just naming that reality for us. Thank you, moderator.
Thank you. Convener?
In all likelihood, that's probably the case. Moving forward, we're really going to have to identify increasingly flexible forms of ministry and develop a system for paying ministry in a way that's fair. There is also the pressing issue of the retirement cliff that we're facing as a church. 77% of our ministers are over 50. 17 are over 65. 17%. We are ageing, our ministers, and realistically, in a few years' time, unless there's a significant shift in the demographics, we're not going to have enough ministerial staff to cover the needs within the Presbytery plans. These are all factors which need to be brought into the financing ministry model, which will be brought to next year's Assembly, as we've already said, and will help to enable us to address the allocation of ministry and its sustainability into the longer term. It's a very, very good question, but this is the reality that we're in, and we're working towards that. So yes, it's a hint, but the detail is not finalised as yet. We're taking the next year to work that through, and that's what will come next year. Thank you, moderator.
Thank you, convener. So, do we approve section 5? Yes in the hall, and yes online. Section 6. Do we approve? And online. Section 7, I have two. Firstly, a question from Stuart Love, And then a comment from Ronald Matanduka. I can't read properly because of the light. Matandukufa, sorry. Stuart and then Ronald.
Thank you, Moderator. Stuart Love, 164. As a minister currently on reviewable tenure and knowing others on reviewable tenure, I'm aware of the feeling that some have that their tenure has been dealt with in an arbitrary way. In light of this lived reality and seeing the proposal that all future charges be designated as reviewable tenure only, with the vague statement that this tenure can be terminated for any reason which may seem good to the presbytery, is a cause for concern. My question is this: if this proposal to make all future charges reviewable passes, will the convener and the Assembly Trustees make a firm commitment to producing, as a matter of urgency, a framework for review, inclusive of, but not limited to, the financial state of the charge, which must be followed when reviews of reviewable tenures are conducted? Such a framework, I think, is necessary, as this would act as a safeguard against arbitrary decision-making and should bring some clarity and security to those on reviewable tenure. Thank you.
Convener.
Thank you for the question, a very good question, and the answer is yes. We would make that commitment because this has to be done properly and with equity and with a deep understanding of the situation that congregations in that situation find themselves in. And as I said in earlier remarks, this is both financial and dealing with ministries sensitively in these areas. So yes, the reviewable charge template will also be a part of that, but the answer is yes.
Thank you. And Ronald Matandakufa?
Yes, Ronald Matandakufa, 218. Moderator, I would like to thank the trustees for their report and their joint reflection on tenure. And on that note, I have a wee comment to make. From the perspective of those serving in cross-cultural settings within the Church of Scotland, ministers who may already feel vulnerable, who are far away from home, and as much as it does to all ministers, security matters. And the proposed changes on ministerial tenure should be accompanied with clear safeguarding so that no one should feel excluded. If tenure is to change, regardless of what shape or form it takes, we must replace it with something just as strong, with fair and transparent processes. Processes that ensures that decisions are shaped not only by policy, but by grace, compassion, and the lived experience of those impacted. When the rubber hits the road, those most affected, whether Scottish or not, must be part of the conversations, not after, but before the decisions are made. Thank you.
Thank you. So we turn to section 7. Does the Assembly approve? Yes in the hall and a yes online. We move to section 8 and we have 4 amendments. So I'm going to ask the clerk just to...
Thank you, Moderator. So, section 8, with the first amendment is in the name of the convener, and it is to add at the end, subject to amending paragraph 2 of the Amending Act, open brackets, the new section 5.3 to be inserted by deleting 9.11 and substituting 9.1.
Convener, do you wish to speak to this?
Just to encompass everything that's in those 3 sections, and this helps do that. Thank you.
Does the Assembly approve that? Oh, sorry, I'm sure. Seconded. And the Assembly approves. And online is also approved. The second amendment is in the name of Grant Barclay, the convener, sorry, the principal clerk.
Yeah, just say Fiona, or Oi.
Oi.
Add at the end, subject to amending paragraph 2 of the Amending Act, the new section 5.3 to be inserted by adding at the end, for the avoidance of doubt. This provision does not affect the introduction of a minister on unrestricted tenure to a united or linked charge in terms of section 8.4.2 of this Act.
Is the convener prepared to accept this? You are. Grant, do you wish to speak to it briefly?
Grant Barclay, 152 moderator. Very briefly, this simply protects the position of those ministers on unrestricted tenure who are agreeing to an adjustment. I'm delighted the convener is prepared to accept.
Is it seconded? Does the Assembly approve? Yes in the room and yes online. Our next amendment comes in the name of Brian Kerr.
No, Fiona Crawford.
Oh, sorry.
Sorry, moderator. So next amendment comes in the name of Fiona Crawford. At the end, subject to amending the Act by deleting paragraphs 3, 4, 5, and... Is that the right one? No, that's the other one. No, I need the previous one, guys. There was a muddle on the numbering. Thank you, we're on 3. Fiona Crawford's... No, that's not right.
On the hub.
It's not been correctly put on the hub. It's A8.
So that's Brian Kerr's one that's coming up.
Yes, it needs to be A8, please. That is, it's not been marked 3.
So it should be subject to amending paragraph 2 of the amending Act.
No, that's not correct.
That's Fiona Crawford's one.
Shall I? I can read it for you. I've got the right one here.
Right, so this is in the name of Fiona Crawford.
And we need to get the hub right first, but it should be, it's A8 currently on the hub. Add at the end, subject to amending paragraph 2. That's the one you're looking for. Here, we've got it. Oh, let's have a cheer. Hey! Excellent, right. Okay, boys and girls. Moderators, sorry. Right, subject to amending paragraph 2 of the amending Act, the new section 5.3 to be inserted by removing the words, open quotes, and oblique or where adjustment is effective, and adding at the end, where charges are already in the process of adjustment, presbyteries shall have until December 2025 to effect proposed adjustment with unrestricted tenure.
Is it seconded?
Seconded.
Is the convener willing to accept? Yes. Fiona, if you'd like to again speak briefly to it.
Thank you, moderator. Fiona Crawford, 207 Presbytery Clark, Forth Valley and Clydesdale. Similar to Dr Barclay, this is really just to tidy things up for us and to ensure that where we have conversations that are already well underway, that we are able to ensure that they can go to getting permission to call without having to go and revisit conversations to renegotiate on the basis of a reviewable charge.
Thank you. And the fourth amendment in the name of Brian Kerr. Sorry, we haven't passed it. That's the Assembly accept the amendment in the name of Fiona Crawford. Yes in the room and yes online. So now, Brian Kerr's.
Brian Kerr's amendment is as follows. At the end, subject to amending the Act by deleting paragraphs 3, 4 and 6 of the amending Act, and also in paragraph 7, deleting sections 10.3 to 12.26 inclusive of the amending Act.
Is this seconded? Yeah. Does the convener wish to accept it? No. Brian?
I thought I might break that run. Moderator, there's no doubt that as a denomination we need to get to grips, sorry, Kerr 212, we need to get to grips with the financial reality. However, I'm unconvinced that declaring congregations insolvent within the year is the right model at this time. I can't think of any congregations that I've worked with as a former clerk who purposefully sought or were happy about having shortfalls in contributions. The vast majority, if not all, wanted to and worked hard to get back to the place where they met what was requested of them. In fact, many were able to meet their annual contribution going forward. However, the shortfall would remain, and that was there as a weight impossible to clear. And it's right that Presbytery and the finance team work with congregations where there are shortfalls to determine an appropriate repayment plan and further a plan to increase general stewardship within the congregation. That's where good governance is key, and that alone would demonstrate to Oscar that not only are we taking financial reality seriously, but seeking to turn things around in the most financially vulnerable congregations. I asked the General Treasurer for the number of congregations who had shortfalls at the end of December last year, trying to work out how many this would affect. 114 congregations with a shortfall, 88 greater than £1,000. So section 10.1 and 2 of the proposed change to the Act are essential. However, from 10.3 on, I have genuine fears and concerns. As we make these decisions today, we're heading towards the end of May. By the time this gets back to Kirk sessions in June, even the most switched on of Kirk sessions would not have a stewardship programme until at least the autumn, which will have a very limited effect on the finances of the congregation this year and their ability to meet their contributions. That means in January, conversations will be held with those congregations, and if repayment isn't made in a few months, by the end of March, April, congregations will be told that they're at risk of insolvency, and by the time we stand here next year, ministers given notice. The minister leaves, an interim moderator needs appointed from an already stretched pool, congregations are forced to adjust, and the adjusted congregation needs to accept the shortfall and the debts and pay them off. Not a great start to a new adjustment. Now, even if all those things seem fair given notice, I suggest they're profoundly unfair at this time. It hardly seems just that in the middle of the financial year on which decisions will be made, ministers and sessions receive the news that they will be at risk of insolvency and of being removed from their charge, where any action taken locally might not result in turning that situation around in time. Now, we've heard that the trustees plan to bring a new financial ministry model to next year's assembly. This will mean congregations likely paying for the ministry they receive and therefore would need no insolvency legislation, or would need insolvency legislation in a different type of format. As part of that new financial model, proper regulations to deal with struggling congregations that make sense for that model could then be brought in. What we're being asked to pass today is effectively a temporary solution which by next year's Assembly will be superseded by a new financial model. I've heard people say we might never need to use this. That's not what law does. The argument might be made that the Finance Department and the trustees will seek to prioritise those with the greatest shortfalls. But that's not what the legislation allows for. If a shortfall exists and is not justified, then the insolvency process begins. A minister given notice then, not maybe. Given that this legislation seeks to alter how the Church of Scotland effectively changes tenure of ministers, this legislation must be applied evenly to all, not cherry-picked based on criterion of how much a shortfall is, which is neither in the Act nor presented to Assembly for approval. Argument might also be made that this is not legislation that punishes congregations and ministers, but helpful legislation to allow congregations and ministers to move forward. I remain unconvinced by that argument. And examining the Housing and Loan Fund operating processes, despite what the convener said earlier in response to Sandra Black's question, support does not seem to be available to ministers who will be given such notice, and therefore housing cannot be guaranteed. Yes, where congregations have shortfalls and the finance team need to work, then with them to try and turn the situation around with presbytery. But at this point, given the short notice period, it would not be helpful to embark on a process while also altering our understanding of tenure for inducted ministers. In the vast majority of cases, our congregations need the ministers as part of the solution to turn this process and their fortunes around. So therefore, I urge the Assembly to approve the amendment in my name, which keeps the strong financial review element and the intentional support to work with congregations to turn finances around, but removes the threat of insolvency and negative adjustment from congregations and the reality of issuing 6-month notice to ministers in an already uncertain time.
Thank you, Brian. I have no request to speak, so convener.
Thank you, Moderator. Thank you, Brian, for that very, very full explanation to your proposed section of deliverance. Firstly, Assembly, I wish to apologise to you for the comment I made on the housing and loan support. It would only be available to those ministers who are retiring. When you're having 4 or 5 voices speaking to you, when you're trying to work out what an answer is going to be, you can get some things mixed up. So my apologies for that, and I hope that corrects that particular situation. The Assembly Trustees have been given a task by the General Assembly to bring the Church to a balanced budget by 2027. This isn't easy. I can't emphasise enough how difficult this is for the trustees, for congregations that fall into this category. The intention is that the proposals will encourage presbyteries and congregations to work together in the hope of achieving financial sustainability for flagging congregations, and will also reduce a degree of realism about the Church's wider financial situation, which is not present in the current system. The conversations our finance team will have with congregations and presbyteries will prioritise those congregations with the largest shortfalls. They must. Our hope is that the process itself will make a difference to many, if not most, congregations. It is not, though, the involvement of finance staff in the church office which is going to achieve it by themselves. I don't think it can fairly be said that the legislation is punitive, or that the proposed timeframe is unreasonable. We need to act now. Based on a 7-month delay in starting the process to 1st of January 2026, congregations and ministers in this situation will have had a minimum of 10 months to get to grips with this, and in reality, closer to a year. The presbytery always has the option to stop a declaration of insolvency where that is appropriate. So you can see where the two come together. It is a process which gives presbyteries full control over which charges they, with their knowledge of local situations, deem to be essential to mission and capable of getting back on their feet financially. Capable of getting back on their feet. Your suggestion would push back any action until the autumn of 2027. We don't have that time to wait before taking steps, which I acknowledge, once again, they are painful and they're difficult to remedy our current financial crisis. The Assembly has directed that the Church has to move to a balanced budget by 2027. We cannot delay any further in implementing what is a modest start to a much longer process of achieving financial sustainability across the board. So I ask the Assembly to support your Assembly Trustees in taking these first initial steps outlined in our report and not to defer this proposal for another year and therefore reject the deliverance.
Thank you, Convener. We move to an electronic vote on this. Sheila will talk us through.
Thank you, Moderator. We are voting for or against the amendment proposed by Mr. Kerr. In the hall, if you want to vote for, it's button number 1. If you want to vote against, it's button number 2. And the vote is open. Five seconds. Vote is now closed.
So they voted for the amendment 118, against the amendment 196. So the amendment falls. So we turn to Section 8 as amended. I have notice of 2 questions and 1 comment. So, question from Barbara, Susannic Sites, question from Jane Howitt, comment from Jonathan Clipson. So, Barbara, Jane, Jonathan.
Thank you very much, Moderator. Barbara Suchanek Sites. Sorry about that, Moderator. Number 98. Given the fact that already more ministers than anticipated have retired or demitted their charge, and you have outlined that this is going to increase, and the resulting shortfall in ministers, and given the Assembly Trustees' own assessment that as long as there is no growth in membership, we will continue to have to make cuts. Have the Assembly Trustees considered alternatives, and I mean alternatives to this particular section, to Section 8, that encourages growth rather than further decline, both spiritually and financially, as affected ministers will have no option but to move on and often beyond the Church of Scotland, leaving vacancies that are likely to further decline in income, especially where adjustments prove complicated and drawn out, and as future candidates will be discouraged from applying despite a new and exciting training program, as they see no perspective for themselves thereafter. If the trustees have considered alternatives, what are they? And also, how do the Assembly trustees justify the, I think, inevitable further decline of Christ Church under their deliverance theologically? I recognize the input of the Theological Forum into the report, but I would seek some clarification, and I would be very happy for both the trustees and the Theological Forum for further discussions, as it would take longer than I am allowed to speak. I note, however, that there is no scripture reference, that the Martin Luther quote is, in my opinion, taken out of context, and that the deliverance seems to contradict the bias for the poor and weak, often affirmed by the General Assembly. I also think that we've spoken a lot about realism. Realistically, I think that the deliverance will not solve the problems we all know we have, but will contribute to further decline. So you will not be surprised to know that I will not support this section and urge this Assembly to resist it if you do not have a very good answer. Thank you.
Okay, convener, a very good answer.
I hope I do have a very good answer, moderator. Yes, the trustees did consider alternatives. The report reflects a process of discernment that included engagement with the Theological Forum and an honest reckoning with the financial, structural and missional realities currently facing our church. The financial trajectory, if left unchecked, would not simply stall growth, but risk institutional collapse in certain areas. In that light, Section 8 is not proposed as a vehicle of decline, but as a hard but necessary step to sustain the wider mission of the Church into the future. The broader aim is to move towards a model where ministry is better supported, more collaborative, and ultimately more sustainable. The hope is that by focusing resources where they are most needed and where ministry can flourish, the Church will not deter candidates, but will instead offer a realistic and hopeful path forward for those entering ministry. We would not claim that Section 8 is a theological statement. Rather, it is a stewardship decision taken in light of theological convictions, notably the call to be a church that is faithful, reformed, and reforming. There is no desire to retreat from the Church's priority to the poor. And that's an assurance to Scott McCarthy also, who commented earlier. The danger of spreading too thinly risks undermining meaningful ministry in areas of greatest need. These are difficult decisions, they are heartbreaking, and they have such emotional attachment. It is not intended to usher in decline, but to face reality with faith, courage, and hope. In all our work, there must be theological reflection, pastoral sensitivity, and collective prayer as the church continues to walk this very, very difficult road. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you, Convener. Our next question is from Jane Howitt.
Moderator, here. In front of you.
Absolutely.
Jane Howitt, number 11. It has been so interesting reflecting on this debate this morning and hearing how often we have been brought back to our priority area parishes or to other parts of our country which are struggling and parishes struggling by the very nature and makeup and sometimes geographical location in which they're set and how that impacts on their financial resilience. I think these have been some of the major comments that have occupied us over the course of this morning. And you, Convener, you've already said now several times that it is heartbreaking, and I'm sure that we all echo that sentiment. To close any church on the basis of financial insolvency is indeed heartbreaking, not just for those of us here, but for every member in that congregation, and indeed for many of the members of the communities in which those congregations are set. We've recognised that we have many priority area parishes, some of which may never be financially solvent, and yet they are bringing the love, the light, the hope of Christ into some of the most challenging areas in our land. One of the key features of our Presbyterianism is that we share our resources. We share them with one another because we realise that we are partners in the gospel ministry of fulfilling the Great Commission Jesus entrusted to us. When I was a child, this was instilled in me, as each year my home church gave a significant sum of money to a neighbouring priority area parish, which through no fault of its own would never be self-supporting. And having later in ministry served in some significantly deprived areas and benefited from the support of other more financially resilient churches and congregations, that has allowed these priority area or very close to that type of congregation to be able to minister holistically within their parish. So I would like to ask the convener, is there a way in which the Assembly trustees can assure the General Assembly that in passing this amendment to the Presbytery Plan Act, we will not be incurring or creating a detrimental effect on the provision of ministry in some of the most financially challenged parishes and communities, where it is absolutely key that we have a living, vital presence? Thank you.
Thank you. Convener?
Thank you for your question and the helpful response to bring it. Insolvency is not paying your liabilities. These are much lower for priority areas. Subsidy from the wider church, I can assure you, will be unchanged. The model that we will bring hopefully continues with a priority to the poor. Thank you, Moderator.
So, Jonathan, for a comment.
Thank you, Moderator. Jonathan Clipston, Commissioner number 332. Can I just start by saying quickly, I do appreciate the work of the Assembly Trustees and all that you do. I resonated with a lot of what was in the report and how you introduced the report. And I also thank you for your communication, especially with ministers throughout the year. Also, an apology to Brian Kerr. If I'd read your amendment more closely, I would have spoken to that, but I'd already put myself down to speak here. I minister at Bremen Church up in Aberdeen, which is a recent union, and if it is an encouragement to you all, it is going well. I love my congregation, and it is a great place to be. When you join, your accounts are looked at, and I think I'm right in saying, but there's no guarantee that I am, that there's a certain reduction given to new union because it's based on the previous two accounts, and it's recognised that you can't just add those two things together. Unfortunately, in our second year, that's almost exactly what happened. And so I was in this place, which I thought ironic, that after establishing a full year set of accounts, we were calculated our Given to Grow contribution on a hypothetical church that never existed. Our contribution was calculated based on the formula, almost £20,000 more than it should have been. That is £20,000 we did not have to pay to Given to Grow. We were one of the churches that Brian mentioned of not having kept up with our Given to Grow throughout the year, and by more than £1,000. Fortunately, we were able to set up a repayment scheme that was acceptable to the church, and we are going through that, and by the end of this year, we'll have paid it all back. Not without significant difficulty to the congregation, and I will leave the Assembly to consider what that money could have been spent on instead. My concern is that when I appealed this, because the numbers were right, there was no appeal. And in fact, my response to the appeal, after setting it through Presbytery, was no response at all. I never heard anything back. So I am concerned when I read the proposed amendments to this Act, where it says in 12.1, for the avoidance of doubt, the designation of a charge as an insolvent charge in terms of section 10.5 shall not be subject to appeal or dissent or complaint or any other form of review other than a procedural review carried out by a reviewer. I am concerned when we hear words that the church is identical, not about survival, but about mission, and to read in 12.2.5, in the event of the reviewer, in a procedural review, determine that neither of the foregoing grounds has been established, the decision of the General Treasurer will be deemed to have become final. I have sympathy with what this is trying to do. I do think we need to work with congregations who aren't able to repay what is being asked them under Given to Grow. But I worry that a church in my situation that wasn't able to pay that back is going to find themselves in a situation without appeal or ability to pay and find themselves insolvent. And as the Act is worded now, I do not find myself in a position where I can accept it.
Okay, we have another comment from Stuart Davidson, after which we'll move to voting on the amended section.
Thank you, Moderator. Stuart Davidson, number 126. This is just for the General Assembly's encouragement. I have been a minister for 17 years. 9 of those years were in Paisley in a priority area. And 7 years ago, I took up a pioneering post as part of the Presbytery of Paisley and Greenock, at the time Clyde. I want to encourage the General Assembly because I believe that necessity is the mother of invention. And I've taken that phrase, and it has inspired my actions, I hope, in terms of ministry. And in Paisley, I don't have, I am now an MDS. I don't have a church of my own. I am an intermoderator, but I don't have a church of my own. And during the last few years, I can say that along with money that the Church of Scotland put into the process, and for the first 5 years, so far we have been given grants up to around about £40,000 so far to keep the work going. And what I want to say and that's from bodies outside of the Church of Scotland as well as things from within the Church of Scotland. What I want to say to the General Assembly is that I believe that where mission is our focus, God never is short in providing for the money that you need. And that has been my experience. That has been my lived experience. And the Presbytery can claim that because they keep the money that the grants come from. So, for example, in the last 3 years, from a beauty company in Renfrew, we have received £6,000, £2,000 each year to put towards our holiday club. And we deliberately meet in a community centre in Fergusley Park rather than in a church hall. And I'm saying to you really that the ball is in your hands because being in a community centre, sure, we pay rent for the space that we use, but it's nothing close to what we would pay if it was a church building. And someone else has taken on the responsibility of that building. And so, yeah, we've got to drag all the stuff along and all that kind of thing. But I want to encourage you, folks, to concentrate on mission, because God is not short of money. And he will give you what you need and what we need as a church. And I just want to encourage you because we have never been short. And these are difficult decisions to make. I've been a parish minister in a private area. The church that I'm interim moderator of is due to close in 2 years' time. And because of previous closures and unions, they have £300,000 in the bank at the moment. Their manse is up for sale for another £300,000. Before the closure, they'll probably have £600,000 in the bank. And you've got to ask yourself, what could they do with that before we even talk about selling the building? So that's why I'm saying the ball is in your hands. Please be innovative in your thinking about what might happen in these situations.
Thank you very much. I'm going to move to the convener to close the debate before we move to vote.
Thank you, Moderator. I just want to respond, if I may, to Jonathan's comments. Firstly, the appeal process exists, but unfortunately, I'm assured from our finance team and the head of finance and general treasurer that appeal didn't go through their process, and therefore that would be the reason you would not get a response from the general treasurer. It seemed to have been stuck at presbytery level. So it's to correct what's been said there, to make sure the Assembly understands that nothing untoward had happened in terms of response from our central office. Really, just to wrap this up, everyone, we're all in this together. And the reason for bringing these proposals to you is for us all to waken up to the fact that we now need to take these difficult decisions and bring these changes to the church in order to endeavour to get to its financial sustainability for the future, for the good of the church, and for investing in ministries in that future. Thank you, Moderator.
Thank you, Convener. So we move to Section 8 as amended. Do we want to have an electronic vote, or are you... Yes. Okay, Sheila. And after the vote, we'll be breaking for lunch.
Thank you, Moderator. That is, we are voting on Section 8 as amended. If you are voting for Section 8 as amended in the hall, it's button 1. If you're voting against Section 8 as amended, button 2. The vote is now open. Five seconds. The vote is now closed.
So they're voted for the amended section 8, 173, against 110. So the amended section carries. We break for lunch. If you could be back here for the start of business at 2 o'clock. Thank you.